My name is Luana Scales, Chair of the DEI Council at Child Guidance Resource Centers. Good afternoon, and welcome to Challenges Facing Service Members and Their Families, hosted by our DEI Council. We would like to know who is tuning in this afternoon and ask that you put your name, organization, and email address in our chat. Also, if there is anyone who has questions or comments for our panelists, information can also go in the chat, and hopefully we will have time to get to those after the panel discussion. We have four special guests today who will be sharing their views on this topic. I'm going to have our panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll go right into our questions. So let's start with the mayor of Eddystone Borough, Rob Yanunzi.
Yanuzzi.
Yanuzzi.
Hi, my name is Rob Yanuzzi, and I'm the mayor of Eddystone, Pennsylvania. I also work as the chief of staff for State Representative Dave Deloso. I served in the United States Navy as a submarine veteran, where I worked as a missile technician. As a submarine sailor, we're deployed for months at a time underwater. We go months without speaking to our families and loved ones. We are constantly breathing in recycled air and have no access to sunlight and outdoors. We're expected to work a rotating 16-hour workday and have very little downtime. That type of environment can take a toll on our mental health and our overall well-being. I remember every time that I went underway, it would take me several weeks to adjust back to being in society. And all the while, I knew in the back of my mind that I would have to go back down eventually. The type of work we do can be anxiety inducing, as we're working on highly complex weaponry, and there's no room for any error, as I worked on nuclear weapons when I was in. Since I've been home, I worked in the nuclear weapons field as a civilian in the private sector. And several years ago, I transitioned into the role of state government, where I helped people gain access to veterans benefits at the state level and through veteran service officers. I'm also a member of the VFW, and I started a nonprofit called the Society for Suicide Prevention, which was designed to help prevent suicide in our local community. I also serve as a secretary of the Pennsylvania Democratic State Veterans Caucus, and I am a big proponent of preventing veteran suicide. And this summer I rode 250 miles on my bicycle to help fundraise for another nonprofit called Stop Soldier Suicide, which provides critical resources and support for veterans and their families.
Thank you. How about Christopher Kowardopich?
Kowardopich. Thank you so much for that. And Rob, thank you. I serve with Rob in the Democratic Party. I'm the chair of the Veterans Caucus statewide for the Democratic Party. I am also, well, I guess I lost this role. It's a good thing. I was the co-chair of Veterans for Fetterman. And so I do a lot of political organizing around with veterans issues. What really got me into this was I was a medic in the United States Army with the Pennsylvania National Guard, came back home, seen a lot of the issues that veterans were dealing with. My work was very related to casework, case management, a lot of those aspects of it. We also are very big into the Veterans Caucus and military families. I'm really glad to see you're inclusive of that part of the community in this discussion about DE&I that we're going to have today, because there are just aspects, and as your therapist, I will try to talk a little bit about. I don't have those experiences myself, but I did behavioral health tech. I've done some research on this stuff as well. And I think what's neglected are the children and the impact that has. Going back to Rob's story, what happens when a submarine, a kid has his dad taken away, let's say, or mom, for 6 months on a deployment, or a year, or 2 years, right? And then what psychologically happens when they come back and their parents trying to adjust, and all these family dynamics come into play, right? It's really important for us to talk about that. So, just a little bit about me.
Okay, Joan Boykin.
Well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Rob, for your service. Of course, I'm coming from a civilian angle here because, of course, my name is Joan Boykin, and I worked with the Department of Defense for like over 30 years. And I served in many capacities as I provided information and referral assistance to soldiers and their family members. In fact, my last assignment was working as the director for the Exceptional Family Member Program, where we served approximately 6,500 family members, both on and off the installation that fell into that category. And as a military spouse myself, I can identify with a lot of those needs that family members do encounter. So I look forward to our conversation. Thank you.
Michael.
Yeah, I'm Mike Urban. Thank you for having me here. I am United States Army veteran. I was a paratrooper in the 82nd Airborne. Veterans are really important. I started my journey to serving other veterans when I got hurt as a service member. I got hurt jumping out of a plane, so I lost half of my lung. I've had my leg injured. I had about 12 surgeries, which is the similar story to everyone else who has addiction at this point. Started with the prescriptions the doctors were giving me. Lo and behold, 10 years later, I finally got sober. I got my LCSW. I've been, working with veterans within substance use and the eating disorder world for a few years now. I actually, during COVID, the local VAs had nowhere to send the veterans. So I built a clinical program for veterans at Living Grin. Had about 200 veterans come through the program from May to February. So I was kept very busy. Since then, I joined Banyan Treatment Centers, which is a national provider. They said, we have 15 facilities that can treat veterans. Why don't you come teach us how to work with them? So part of my job is working with the veterans, building the clinical program, and identifying the needs where veterans need access to care. So I'm all over the country. I'm actually leaving for Alaska on Friday because there are no treatment centers for veterans in Alaska. So we are going to open one. So very entrenched in the community.
So I kind of think that you all have already answered our question 1. So I'm going to move on to question 2, and I'm going to start with Christopher.
Sure.
How do diversity, equity, and inclusion issues impact veterans, active duty military members, and their families?
Right. So I think there's quite a few ways that they first impact it. And I think one of the things for mental health providers is to, and the VA trains this very well, is to understand that there's a difference between enlisted personnel and officers. So if you're a mental health provider, you have to understand there's two cultures in here. There's one that's the kind of the proletarians and the bourgeoisie, right? Like if you think of it in a classical academic kind of context. And they're working, there is cultural connection because you do have a tight military bond, but they're dealing with these type of things. And a lot of the research I've seen has been that there's a lot of frustration with veterans of color, for example, with having to deal with these officers. There's more UCMJs, which are Article 15, so military write-ups, like when you get write-up at a corporation, gives you a write-up, but they take away your rank as well. So you get depromoted, you get some money loss, and they disproportionately go to people of color. So there's a historical context of what they call blue discharges. So after World War II, LGBT and veterans, they got blue discharges, and Black veterans, they got blue discharges where they didn't get their full benefits. So I think part of this is this cultural aspect that comes, intersects with the identity of being veteran and being also from different marginalized groups. Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I served under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. That's another example of it. Yeah, that's just a little bit about it. I don't want to take, I don't know how much time I have per question.
Okay, Rob, how about you? The same question. How do diversity, equity, and inclusion issues impact veterans, active duty military members, and their families?
So I feel that diversity, equity, and inclusion are really important to veterans issues. I think that it's important to help minority veterans populations because they may have barriers that others do not. We need to make sure that they have access to affordable transportation, food, housing, assistance, affordable health care. Other minority populations that we need to address are people in the LGBTQ community, especially those that served under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, that may be suffering because of the results of those discharges that Chris was talking about. Just a few years ago, even the former president's administration tried to roll back protection for transgender military members. Just to give you a good example of the things that we're still fighting, these things that may seem ridiculous to some people. Minority veterans put their lives on the line to serve our country, and it's very important that we provide everybody with the care and assistance that they deserve if they do so.
Thank you. Joan, the same question.
Well, of course, equality is essential in whatever environment you may be placed in. Military service members are not exempt from that. But while service members, soldiers train and are with their fellow service members for most of the day and sometimes longer, family members must often navigate being in new environments with no friends and sometimes without a support system. While the Army provides wonderful programs for families, the information must be disseminated by the service member who receives most of the information through what we call a newcomer's orientation. However, if the family members don't get that information, they're stuck. They don't know what resources are actually available to them. Therefore, they may not be aware. They may have challenges like language. If a spouse only speaks English, or very little English, and is suddenly placed in a new environment, that's a problem, especially if you're in a new country or a new place. Transportation can be a problem. Especially where there's only one vehicle involved. I know that I talked to several service members who said their family members were struggling because they had the one car and they used it for most of the day. Fear of the unknown, fear of being accepted. When you move into a new environment, new location, there's a lot that a family member has to go through, not including the children, which they are going through the very same thing at the same time. Fear of being left alone for long periods of time can also be challenging. Some family members, and this is where I come in as well, often leave their own professional career pursuits in order to follow their spouse around the world for their military responsibilities. This can be problematic since a lot of employers don't want to hire someone who may only be available for 3 years and no longer. They're looking for people who usually want to stay and make a career wherever they go. So hence, these individuals, mostly women, I would say, must work at jobs far beneath their capabilities. So those are some issues. I know I fell into that category for quite some time. And so I had to select jobs that were very, very low paying because, again, they didn't want to hire me because they knew I was a service member spouse. And until I was actually officially into the DoD system, was I able to move a little more freely. But nevertheless, there are still not that many positions that are available when family members move from place to place for up to 3 years.
Okay, Michael.
Yeah, one thing that jumped right out at me, and I don't know if which one it falls under this, but I'm always kind of dumbfounded that none of our service members actually have, if you're over the age of 21, you don't get mental health or substance use residential benefits under TRICARE. I was kind of looking at this as a mental health lens, and I think that's all encompassing of all of our service members. I really don't understand why they don't have mental health benefits. It just kind of is befuddling to me. But some of the issues that I've definitely seen, I've been to over 45 veterans hospitals, and one of the biggest issues I hear and continue to hear is for female veterans. Definitely a lack of services in the few facilities that have them. They're not always seem to be providing them correctly, like an MST program in the middle of a VA hospital where you have to walk through the men's unit and everything else to get to it. Just and that itself, the VA does have an initiative to have military sexual trauma treatment, but there's very few actual programs and actually gender specific programs for both male and female. I've encountered more male veterans with MST than I have female, just due to the population. The population of the VA is like 80% male. But those services are lacking for both. And then the cultural competency in providing care to LGBTQ veterans at some facilities leaves things less than desirable for those veterans. And then, another issue that I definitely have encountered in dealing with veterans who do use the VA, it seems to really come down to socioeconomic status.
Mhm.
That seems to be the biggest decider, not including any of the other things we've discussed that really has an impact on their outcomes, especially after getting care. People who fall in the lower socioeconomic statuses, regardless of anything else, their outcomes seem to be a lot worse and more difficult to help fill and support when they leave treatment.
Okay, Michael, we're going to stay with you for the next question. What are some of the challenges veterans experience when trying to work with the VA?
So some of the biggest things, there's a saying for people that work in the VA, and that's, if you've seen one VA, you've seen one VA. It's unfortunate it's a federal system, and you would think what they do in Philadelphia is what they would do in Wilmington, Delaware, only 50 miles away, and it's completely opposite of that. I think it's a very daunting task to try to navigate the VA. I think it's something, if you do it on your own and you're not very motivated to do it, you're not going to get very far. I think one of the biggest challenges too is getting access to care. And, unfortunately, we saw in the latest Senate hearings, the VA still can't figure out how to calculate what the wait times are. I know in my experience recently, the Philadelphia wait time said 5 days. I called for an appointment. They said, we'll see you in 2 months. So I don't, the biggest thing for me is the mental health care access. There's not enough providers within the VA to get veterans in a timely manner. In the last year, I don't know how many phone calls I've gotten from veterans I've been to the ER 3 times because they needed a detox, and the family finds them laying in the street because the VA decided you can go home and wait for one of our beds to open rather than using community care. And when I speak with VA administrators, their answer always is, well, if we send them to the community, it doesn't justify our budget next year. And it's unfortunately that the institution has become more important than the people they serve. Look, there's a lot of good people. I don't mean to knock them, but it's the last few years of working as a community provider has shown me what it's like. And I know myself, when I called and asked for help, I was told I could be in the treatment in 2 months. I called and needed help then. I didn't need it 60 days from now. And I didn't wait 60 days. It took me another year to get in there to when I finally called and was able to get in. So I think, those are some of the biggest challenges are getting in in a timely manner. And the other thing is, after being injured, luckily I had a grandmother that was willing to take care of me. I put in for my compensation. It took 11 years for them to finally grant the compensation, which, thank God, my life had moved on from there and I was able to take care of myself, but I needed the money 11 years ago for my own care. So I feel bad for the veterans who don't have a grandmother that can help them out and feed them and get them up and out of bed.
Right. Well,
Rob,
So one of the things that my office does is help residents cut through a lot of the government red tape. Oftentimes veterans will not apply for benefits because they don't have the resources to get direct help with their applications. So one of the things that my office did was set up a veteran service officer program so that veterans and their families can work with veteran service officers to apply for benefits. Now, if anybody watching this is experiencing any issues with red tape or needs addressing certain problems, they should reach out to Representative DeLoso's office or any other state representative's office in the Delaware County area. And another great resource for veterans is the county veterans office. And they also have veteran service officers that can provide vets with the help that they need as well. So in short, red tape.
Christopher.
Yeah, so the VA is, I want to talk about, I think I agree with everything people have been saying so far, and I think there's a lot of good points here. I'll talk about my experience. I wanted to go see a dermatologist. I was put on a 2-month wait list. So I said, okay, let me go and ask to, because it's over 30 days, I can go see a civilian provider. I go and I start looking on the internet. I'm like, let me look up all my civilian providers. I was a medic. I want to see who I feel comfortable with. What are the credentials of people and everything, and go through everyone. Not accepting new patients, not accepting new patients, not accepting new patients. I went through every provider in Chester County, not accepting new patients. I called my doctor. He's like, no, there's nobody accepting new patients right now for dermatology. Your only option right now is VA healthcare, because out here in Chester County, also with the closing of Brandywine Hospital, and you have Jennersville Hospital closing, there is just, we are in a meltdown, a medical meltdown, hospital meltdowns, a Memorial Hospital in Delaware County. So those environmental factors are taken into consideration. It's typically, usually, I think, a 2-month waiting list anyways, but like in this environment at this moment, the VA is the best care, is the only place I can get access to care right now. So we have a lot of other factors that go into consideration. It goes back to how each hospital is kind of different, and their medical communities are different, and those type of things. So it's always challenging from a provider's perspective to know how we have a sickness management system, right? We don't really have a health equity system in this country, and that sometimes pushes over into the VA because the way our healthcare system is set up.
Okay, Joan, same question. What are some of the challenges veterans experience when trying to work with the VA?
Well, I would say I agree with everything that you all have already said. I know my husband is a 100% disabled veteran, and the one thing that I can share was a very tragic situation that happened to us a few years ago. My husband had a tumor removed from his brain, and we went for the services, and they told him he stayed there because his whole system was shutting down. So after the treatment, he was told he had to take 2 medications for the rest of his life or else he could die. So of course, I'm very concerned about those kinds of things. So of course, the VA is supposed to send you your medications timely through the mail. And, my husband goes online to order his medications, but when they don't come, there's the problem. So we call, and I'll never forget this one time where he had not had his medication for almost 5 days. He was literally completely shutting down. We rushed him to the emergency room, and they told me that, oh, there's nothing wrong with him. He's just very dehydrated. So, needless to say, they sent us home and told us he needed, they gave him an IV. But nonetheless, we were ushered back to the hospital shortly thereafter. He was dying, literally. And so I literally went to the administrator's office and I said, look, you guys got to do something. But it took so long for those services to be rendered. I watched my husband for nearly 10 days in the hospital, where they only needed to provide him with his new medication. And then when they came into his room, they never bothered to share any of that information about how they were going to reintroduce him to the medications. So I was literally just sitting there watching him expire, very, very slow death, so to speak. And so finally, I said to the doctor, I said, well, what are you doing? So he finally came in to tell me that because my husband was in such dire straits, that they needed to wean him off of all medications and then gradually bring him back. But the only thing he needed were the 2 pills that they failed to send him on a timely basis. So Those are some of the challenges I know as civilians, family members that we face. Sometimes veterans, I'm sure, face transportation to and from the VA, the distance if you're in a very rural community, availability of services, which you guys have already spoken about, appointments and counseling services. Processing of claims is also another thing that takes an awful long time. I know it took my husband years, as I think, Chris, you said it took years for your final benefits to come through. And so here in Texas, I know in probably every state, there are disability, what do you call them? DAVs, Disabled American Veterans Associations, and they all seem to do things a little differently. So I would advise that everybody just consult your local DAV to try and find the services that are available in your local areas.
Okay, so Joan, I'm going to continue with you for the next question. Recognizing that there are numerous challenges facing military members and their families, what are some things mental and behavioral health organizations like Child Guidance can do to help families impacted by military life?
Okay, well, my first thought is that agencies need to be available. Set resource tables up in venues like the YMCA, the library, or even outside local grocery stores where family members can learn more about the services you all provide, especially if your location does not get the foot traffic that some other organizations might get. I personally also believe that it is essential for support agencies to get to know the people they're trying to support. I believe that staffing should be very diverse and to include people who are bilingual. Focus group discussion groups sometimes work if you're working with a small group of people. That can sometimes help agencies better provide the kinds of services military families need. It should be noted that outside agencies are not allowed to obtain any direct contact information from any military agency about military families and their needs. Therefore, agencies should periodically discuss the needs in communities and have military liaison present to gather information from agencies and disseminate it to official military offices as deemed appropriate. However, once a service member or a family member contacts a specific outside agency, that agency can then work directly with family members because they have requested services. I would recommend that Child Guidance get their pamphlets out in the marketplace where the majority of families frequent. Perhaps information could also be disseminated to local churches, provided via social media outlets where a lot of people get their information. And I have two resources that I think I'll drop in the chat. You may already be familiar with these. One is called Make the Connection. I'm going to drop it in here now. Okay, hopefully it dropped in there. There you go.
Oh, there it is. Yeah.
Okay. So these are some organizations that have links to their services. I know Military One Source is another good organization that works closely with military family members 24/7. I know here in Texas, that's a big one, but they are available in various states. So that's pretty much all that I have in terms of how Child Guidance can reach out to those people in the community. That used to work very well for us here in Texas.
Okay, Chris, how about you? Recognizing that there are numerous challenges facing military members and their families, what are some things mental and behavioral health organizations like Child Guidance can do to help families impacted by military life?
Right. So one of the things I want to pivot back to something Joanne had said about the pharmacies, and I've had those issues too with the wait lines in pharmacies. This is very common, and I think as a provider, the number one thing the VA really should be focusing on is if you need your medication, you should be able to drive down to the pharmacy and pick it up. There needs to be some type of, I mean, it's a simple fix on a website where you can click pick up in person, right? Like you should be able to do that because these are serious medications, right? And your providers all know that. So I think that's something to bring into awareness about that to the people you're working with, that this is a chronic issue, unlike other pharmacies where you can go in person. I think providers, it's important to always know that as mental health providers. The other thing was I worked with, when I was behavioral health tech, I worked under a psychologist. And what she said was something interesting. Our brains don't stop developing until we're 25, 30. And a lot of the traumatic experiences and a lot of things happen to 19, 20-year-olds, 18-year-olds, those under 21. And a lot of times it's still issues that are more, the mental hasn't fully developed yet. And I think sometimes we think, oh, the veteran, the big strong, they're being an adult, right? And they still have it from a more child psychology perspective. And she had her that was what her master's was in. Her PhD was with veterans, but she had such a strong impact with a lot of the younger veterans. Those they were coming back and such. It just had such a great impact that I think to kind of look at that and kind of just get out that social construct of what the kind of old veteran is with a walker in our mind, and realize we're dealing with sometimes very youth, right? Same goes with the women who are family members, right? They're very young, they get married, and they're still going to have those adjustment, whatever issues they're having with, and children are children, right? They're still following it. So a lot of therapy I don't think has really been done well under that kind of approach, and we should really consider looking from a clinical perspective holistically and understanding where this person is coming from.
Okay. Rob.
So a lot of veterans services apply to the whole family. So it may be beneficial to get them in contact with a veteran service officer to see what they may be eligible for. There may be things that they are eligible for that they just don't know about. It may be also good to set up a veteran support group. Some children's may be able to, sorry about that. Some children may be away from one parent for an extended period of time. So relying on other children and families that are going through the same thing may be beneficial to them. There are also programs in the area that help veterans with animal therapy. There are organizations like Pets for Patriots, Canines for Warriors, Alpha Bravo Canine, and America's Vet Dog, which we can see about setting up programs with Delaware County animal shelters to provide service animals to wounded veterans and emotional support dogs to veterans and their families. Last year, the Puppies Assisting Wounded Service Members for Veterans Therapy Act was passed at the federal level, and this established a 5-year program to provide service dogs to veterans with PTSD. The law provides cost assistance for trained therapy dogs and help with veterinary bills. Studies have shown that companion pets are known to help veterans with mental health issues or PTSD. These programs also apply to the families impacted by the veterans' issues. They would benefit from a program that like this in our community, because service animals can have an important impact on helping veterans get reacquainted back into society. Bringing a pet into the family could be a beneficial element to a struggling veteran family. In Bucks County, there's also a nonprofit that provides equestrian services to veterans and their families. It provides them the ability to heal through a therapeutic riding center. Research shows that riding horses is an innovative way to help provide mental health to veterans in need.
Fantastic. Michael, same question.
Shamrock Reigns, by the way, Rob.
No.
That's what it's called, Shamrock Reigns, the place you're talking about.
All right.
Cool.
I think, one of the going back to Rob's point in the beginning about being away for extended periods of time. And, at Fort Bragg, where I was at, some of the special ops guys would just disappear one night. And, they don't tell their families where they're going, and then they'll reappear a month later or a longer period of time. And I think that has a huge impact on, both the child and the spouse within that family system. So I think one of the biggest ways is helping families get back into a more healthy way of functioning, right? They're done their service, and nobody's going to be disappearing, and everybody was used to that and on edge all the time. So I think it's something child guidance can focus on is helping them to re-engage the family system and help them refocus how they function, what is acceptable, what's not acceptable. And then the other big piece of that is seeing the experiences of war being brought home and unintentionally being passed on to the children or the spouse, and how that affects that system as well. But the individual service members and the children don't understand. It has nothing to do with them, so helping the spouses and the children get a better understanding of what their service member had gone through, and that the actions and some of the things going on have less to do with them and more to do with their experience in the military. I think if you look after World War II, I always wonder how many families were negatively impacted by the way they handled things after that compared to how they do now.
Okay, well, I thank all of you for responding to these questions. And any other comments before we wrap things up?
Well, I'd just like to say just one little thing. Coming from an organization that we dealt with special needs, all those things are so very important. And when you include children with like autism and other physical conditions, when their dads or their moms come home after being through war, it is quite challenging. It's challenging while they're away, and it's also very challenging when they return home. So I really like that idea about the support group for children. I think that's going to be good, but also factor in children with special needs, because sometimes they get overlooked.
Anything else? Okay, well, Child Guidance and I would like to thank you all for joining us and providing such wonderful information. And our continued goal as an organization is to host discussions related to diversity, equity, and inclusion throughout the year. And we hope you will join us once again as we provide wonderful information and impactful information for the community. Thank you so much.